January 1943. Deep inside the ruins of Stalingrad, German soldiers were freezing, starving, and running out of ammunition. Only months earlier, the German Sixth Army had advanced toward the Volga, convinced that another great victory was within reach. Now tens of thousands of men were trapped inside a shrinking pocket while Soviet forces closed around them. Aircraft struggled to bring in enough food and ammunition. Wounded men crowded improvised shelters. Horses were slaughtered for meat. Fuel disappeared. Frostbite spread. And yet the order from Adolf Hitler remained essentially unchanged. Hold the position. The disaster at Stalingrad would become one of the most famous German defeats of the Second World War. But the more important question is not simply why Germany lost one army there. It is how a country that had defeated Poland, crushed France, driven the British Army from continental Europe, and dominated much of the continent, managed to place itself in a war against Britain, the Soviet Union, and the United States at the same time. Because Germany did not collapse because of one bad afternoon, one incompetent general, or one unlucky battle. Its defeat grew from a series of decisions. Each one made the next problem more dangerous. And perhaps the greatest German mistake was believing that spectacular military victories could permanently compensate for increasingly impossible strategic choices. To understand that, we have to return to the moment when Germany appeared almost unbeatable. In the spring of 1940, German forces achieved something few observers had expected. France possessed one of Europe's most powerful armies. Britain had sent an expeditionary force to the continent. French defences along parts of the German frontier were formidable. Yet German armoured formations drove through the Ardennes, crossed the Meuse, and pushed toward the English Channel. Within weeks, the Allied armies had been split. British forces escaped from Dunkirk, but France fell soon afterward. For Hitler, the victories seemed to confirm his instincts. His generals had doubted him before. He had taken risks, and again, those risks had appeared to succeed. That pattern would become dangerous, because rapid victory created the impression that Germany could solve strategic problems through another bold military operation. Britain was now Germany's major opponent in Western Europe, but Britain did not surrender. The Royal Navy remained powerful. The British Empire still possessed enormous resources, and the United Kingdom became a base from which Germany could eventually be attacked. Before any invasion of Britain could be seriously attempted, Germany needed control of the skies. During the Battle of Britain, the Luftwaffe attempted to defeat the Royal Air Force. British fighter pilots, radar stations, aircraft production, command systems, and the geographic advantage of fighting close to home combined to make that far harder than German planners expected. By the autumn of 1940, Britain had survived. Germany had conquered much of continental Western Europe, but one critical enemy remained undefeated directly across the Channel. This was the first major strategic problem. Germany had won a campaign. It had not won the war. Instead of resolving the struggle with Britain, Hitler prepared for something vastly more ambitious: the invasion of the Soviet Union. On June 22, 1941, Germany and its allies attacked along an enormous front. Operation Barbarossa began. German forces initially advanced with extraordinary speed. Huge numbers of Soviet troops were surrounded. Vast territories were captured. Entire Soviet armies appeared to disintegrate. From a distance, it looked like another version of France. But the Soviet Union was not France. The distances were immense. Road conditions were often poor. Rail systems used different gauges. Vehicles broke down. Fuel and ammunition had to travel farther as the armies advanced. Every mile conquered increased the burden on German logistics. And behind the front stood something Germany had badly underestimated: the Soviet Union's ability to replace enormous losses and continue fighting. The Wehrmacht could destroy armies. But destroying Soviet formations was not the same as destroying the Soviet capacity to create new ones. By late summer, the campaign had already become far more difficult than German planners had expected. German Army Group Center became involved in increasingly costly fighting around Smolensk and Yelnya. Historians continue to debate exactly when Germany lost its realistic chance of achieving its original objectives, but the crucial point is clear: The quick campaign Germany expected was becoming a prolonged war of attrition. And Germany was poorly positioned for that kind of conflict. German military power had been extraordinarily effective when concentration, surprise, operational speed, and local superiority allowed commanders to destroy enemy forces quickly. A prolonged continental war was different. Now Germany needed replacements: trucks, locomotives, fuel, aircraft, engines, food, ammunition, winter equipment, and enormous quantities of manpower. The battlefield was no longer simply testing German tactics, it was testing the entire German war system. Then another problem appeared. The invasion of the Soviet Union was not conducted merely as a conventional military campaign. Nazi ideology transformed it into a racial and ideological war of annihilation. German military and police authorities participated in brutal occupation policies. Soviet civilians were deliberately starved, deported, exploited, and murdered. Political commissars were targeted. Jewish communities were subjected to systematic mass murder. Millions would die under German occupation. These policies were crimes in their own right, but they also carried military consequences. German forces were attempting to control vast territories while simultaneously treating enormous sections of the population as enemies or expendable human beings. The occupation could therefore produce fear, hatred, resistance, and instability behind German lines, rather than providing the political advantages a more pragmatic occupation might have offered. Even some German commanders eventually recognized that particularly brutal measures could strengthen Soviet resistance. Here, the contradiction at the heart of Germany's war becomes impossible to ignore. Germany needed resources from the territories it conquered. It needed labor, food, transportation, security, local cooperation. Yet Nazi ideology encouraged policies that destroyed people, communities, and potential cooperation. Ideology was not separate from German strategy. It was damaging it from inside. Then winter arrived. The Germans approached Moscow, but the rapid victory Hitler had expected had not happened. The Soviet government had not collapsed. The Red Army was still fighting. German troops were exhausted, equipment was worn down, and Germany was now committed to a massive war in the east, while Britain remained undefeated in the west. That situation was already dangerous. 4 days in December made it considerably worse. On December 7, 1941, Japan attacked Pearl Harbor. The United States entered the war against Japan. Germany was not automatically required by the Tripartite Pact to declare war on the United States under those circumstances. But on December 11th, Hitler did exactly that. Germany declared war on America. It was an extraordinary decision. Germany had voluntarily added one of the world's greatest industrial powers to its list of formal enemies while it was already fighting Britain and the Soviet Union. The United States possessed enormous economic potential. Its factories could produce aircraft, trucks, ships, tanks, ammunition, fuel, and other material on a scale Germany would struggle to match. American Lend-Lease assistance would also help sustain the countries already fighting Nazi Germany, including Britain and the Soviet Union. The significance of the decision was not immediately visible on a battlefield. There was no gigantic German army destroyed on December 11th. No city was lost. No front collapsed. That is precisely what makes it such an important strategic mistake. Some of the most dangerous decisions in war do not produce immediate disasters. They change the arithmetic of the future. Germany was now effectively fighting a coalition with far greater combined manpower, industrial resources, access to raw materials, and ultimately production capacity. From this point onward, Germany needed not merely to fight well, it needed to defeat its enemies faster than those enemies could mobilize their superior resources. But the opposite began to happen. The war became longer, and every month that passed made Germany's position harder. By 1942, Hitler still searched for a decisive result in the Soviet Union. This time, attention moved south. Germany needed oil. The Caucasus contained vital petroleum resources. A new offensive pushed deep into southern Soviet territory. But once again, objectives multiplied. German forces advanced toward the Caucasus while another major effort developed around Stalingrad on the Volga. The result was an enormous operational problem. The fronts expanded. Supply lines lengthened. German forces became dispersed. The campaign was trying to achieve too much across too much territory. The National World War II Museum notes that the German High Command once again failed to concentrate on one overriding objective, while its logistical network became increasingly overstretched. And Stalingrad became the trap. The city itself had industrial and transportation importance, but its symbolic value also grew because it carried Joseph Stalin's name. Street fighting consumed German troops. Buildings changed hands. Factories became fortresses. Entire blocks were reduced to rubble. The German Sixth Army became increasingly fixed inside the city. Then in November 1942, the Soviets attacked the weaker Axis forces protecting the German flanks. They broke through. The Soviet spearheads met west of Stalingrad. The Sixth Army was encircled. At that moment, Germany faced a terrible choice. Attempt to break out while enough strength remained, or hold the position and hope it could be supplied and eventually relieved. Hitler chose to hold. The Luftwaffe could not provide the trapped army with everything it required. The relief effort failed. Food, ammunition, medical supplies, and fuel became desperately scarce. Thousands of German soldiers died before the surviving forces surrendered in early 1943. But even Stalingrad was not merely a mistake about one city. It revealed a deeper weakness: Hitler's increasing interference in military operations. Earlier victories had strengthened his confidence that his judgment could overcome professional objections. As the war turned against Germany, flexibility became more important. Yet Hitler frequently demanded that positions be held even when withdrawal might preserve troops. Territory gained enormous symbolic importance. Retreat could be treated almost as a failure of will. But armies cannot operate on will alone. Sometimes retreat saves an army so it can fight again. Sometimes abandoning ground shortens supply lines. Sometimes surrendering a position prevents an encirclement. Germany increasingly lost that flexibility, and the cost accumulated. Experienced soldiers disappeared. Vehicles were destroyed. Aircraft were lost. Officers who could not easily be replaced were killed or captured. Germany could build new weapons. Replacing experience was much harder. Meanwhile, the enemies surrounding Germany were becoming stronger. Soviet factories continued producing enormous quantities of war material. The United States mobilized on a vast scale. Britain remained in the fight. Allied bombing increasingly struck Germany's industrial system and cities. In June 1944, American, British, Canadian, and other Allied forces landed in Normandy. Germany now faced major armies attacking from the west while the Red Army pressed from the east. The war Hitler had created had reached its final contradiction. German forces could still fight extremely hard. German weapons could still be dangerous. German commanders could still win local battles. But local battlefield success could no longer repair the strategic situation. Germany had too many enemies, too many fronts, too many shortages, and too little time. This is why identifying Germany's single biggest mistake is difficult. Was it failing to defeat Britain? Invading the Soviet Union? Underestimating Soviet resilience? The murderous occupation policies that turned the Eastern Campaign into an ideological war of annihilation? Declaring war on the United States? Splitting objectives in 1942? Refusing withdrawals? Historians can reasonably disagree about which decision mattered most, but perhaps there is a more useful answer. The greatest mistake was the pattern connecting them. Hitler and the Nazi leadership repeatedly treated military success as proof that greater risks were justified. Victory in Poland encouraged confidence. Victory in France increased it. Early victories in the Soviet Union appeared to confirm it again. But every new gamble made Germany dependent on another rapid victory. When the rapid victory stopped, the entire structure became exposed. Germany had built a war strategy that required enemies to collapse quickly. Britain did not collapse. The Soviet Union did not collapse. And then the United States entered the conflict. From that moment, Germany faced exactly the kind of war it was least prepared to win. A long struggle against enemies capable of replacing losses, expanding production, opening new fronts, and continuing until Germany's resources were exhausted. The soldiers freezing inside Stalingrad in January 1943 could not see all of this. For them, the war had become brutally simple. Find food, find ammunition, stay warm, survive another day. But their situation represented something far larger. Only 18 months earlier, German armies had crossed into the Soviet Union expecting another rapid campaign. Now one of Germany's most powerful field armies was trapped thousands of kilometers from home. The transformation was not caused by a single unlucky battle. It was the result of decisions made one after another. Decisions that expanded the war faster than Germany could expand the resources needed to fight it. And that may be the central lesson of Germany's defeat. Tactical brilliance can win battles. Operational daring can win campaigns. But neither can permanently rescue a strategy that continues creating more enemies, more territory to defend, longer supply lines, and larger demands than a nation can sustain. By May 1945, Nazi Germany was defeated. Berlin had fallen. The regime that had once dominated much of continental Europe had destroyed itself in a war whose scale grew far beyond its ability to control. Germany's greatest mistake was not simply choosing the wrong road at one moment. It was continuing down that road even as every warning showed where it was leading.